Okay, there we are. So we are in the Derech Hashem. We are in Chelik Gimel, the third part of the book, and we are up to Perek Gimel, which is entitled, we're in the very beginning of the Perek. This Perek is entitled B'mikrei HaNevuah, which literally means the prophetic experience. So just to recap, this chapter is really a continuation of the topic of the previous chapter, and the next chapter will be a continuation further on the topic. In the previous chapter, the Ramchal approached the topic of Ruach HaKodesh and Nevuah, divine inspiration and Nevuah. And the critical difference between those two is that Ruach HaKodesh, in both, let's start the other way. What they have in common is that both involve divine knowledge, meaning knowledge which is coming from Hashem, as opposed to the natural means of achieving knowledge through observation, through science, through mathematics. These are both ways to receive knowledge from Hashem himself. Ruach HaKodesh is nothing but that, Hashem bestowing the knowledge on the individual. Nevuah is very different in that the Ramchal explains that Nevuah, unlike Ruach HaKodesh, Nevuah happens through the experience of the Navi itself, meaning to say that the Navi connects to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and is linked to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so much so that he receives a message from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And the way that he described it all in the end is that there's kind of a ripple effect, because Hashem's knowledge itself is beyond the human capacity to absorb and to digest, and therefore he receives the knowledge in the pure form, and then it takes the form of images that are created in the mind, and then those images lead to certain thoughts, and then those thoughts become the message or the mission that the prophet is supposed to understand from his prophecy. So now the Ramchal is going to embellish and expound on that idea of receiving prophecy here in chapter 3. Hine, hanavi kishegiel l'madrigas hanevuah b'shleimus. When the prophet reaches the full level of prophecy, yagiz es kol hamegiel lo b'hasaga berurah b'yediyah shleima. He is able to grasp everything with clarity and with a complete knowledge. Perush. Now explain the Ramchal. Even though, according to the different levels that we have previously mentioned, Yikdmu lo hadimyonos. First, he sees certain images. Then it comes to thoughts. According to the ways that we have mentioned. When he comes to the clarity of his prophecy, when he experiences prophecy, he realizes the truth of the fact that he is a prophet, meaning his connection with the Kodesh Baruch Hu. That's very real and very tangible. And that which HaKadosh Baruch Hu reveals himself and does all of these pu'ulos, all of these actions. And he grasps that these images that have been conjured up, that have been formed, dimyonos nevu'iyim, they are prophetic visions and images, which are a result of the shefa, of that flow, that energy that Hashem is bestowing upon him. And he is setting in him this knowledge that he wants to place. through this flow, this energy. He is left with no doubts. Not in his prophecy and not in any of its elements, its different parts. Not in its origins and not in its results. So I think the Ramchal, without him explaining in great detail the question that he's trying to address, I believe the Ramchal here is bothered, and I think he's going to develop this a little bit further, but I think he's addressing that if indeed the way that prophecy works is through levels and layers, and it starts with an image and then it develops, so then how is it possible that a prophet will ever be able to have any type of clarity that what he's seeing is a prophecy at all? How will he know that? And how will he be able to do with that prophecy as Hashem expects him to do? So to answer, the Ramchal is addressing that by saying that it's true that the image itself could easily be confused with other images and thoughts that the prophet might conjure up, but the experience is undoubtedly prophetic, meaning when he's experiencing a prophecy, there is no doubt in his mind that he is experiencing a prophecy. He knows that he is encountering a Kodesh Baruch Hu, and he knows he can feel that connection that he is experiencing, and he therefore understands in that moment that whatever images he is seeing are coming from a Kodesh Baruch Hu. What we need to know is so here's a really, really interesting point about prophets and prophecy. It doesn't happen all at one time. The prophet does not reach the highest level of prophecy all at once. They build up level after level until they reach complete prophecy. So they've got to work on it, and they've got to develop it. There is in this matter a training, a discipline. Just like any other wisdom or trade, you've got to be trained. You've got to learn it. That a person rises in its levels until he gets to complete clarity. This is the concept that we find in Tanakh, in Malachim, of the Bnei HaMalachim, the students of the Nevi'im, the students of the prophets. Shahayu omdim lifnei hanavi lislamed b'derech nevuah ma shahayim mitzarech lezeh. They were like essentially apprentices. They were students that would study under a prophet, an experienced prophet, until they were properly trained in the ways of prophecy. That's the way it works. So it wasn't an all or nothing thing. They would start little by little, learning more and more how to develop this skill and how to become a prophet and how to do this. And they would study under an experienced prophet, and that's how it would happen. V'hinei, continues the Ramchal. V'hinei efsheh sheyagia gilui mimenu yisbarach shemo el ha'adam. It is possible that a revelation from Hashem will come upon a person, v'hu lo yakir bo kamo sheyakir hanavi, and he will not recognize it the way that the prophet recognizes it. Ela yachshavehu ki imen amurgashos. He thinks it's some type of sensation. He's feeling something. He's something like that. Until the revelation intensifies to the level of prophecy. Then he realizes what's going on. But when it first starts, he doesn't necessarily recognize it. An example of this from this type would be, when Hashem called upon Shmuel, Shelo Hisnabe Mitchila. He never prophesied before that point. And Hashem never bestowed that shefa, that flow, that energy upon him. He just revealed to Shmuel a certain voice, like a voice that a person would as any other voice. He didn't grasp anything more than that. That's how it began. Then after that, Hashem kind of bestowed that shefa upon him. He put that flow upon him. And then he recognized and he grasped the prophecy in its ways. So sometimes, so even though the Ramchal told us in the previous paragraph that to experience prophecy, the prophet has to study and he has to develop it, and it's a skill that he learns. The Ramchal is saying that even though that is true, typically, it is possible for it to happen in a different way. It is possible for it to happen through starting off with the prophet just, I shouldn't even call it a prophet, where Hashem calls out to the person. And the prophecy begins as nothing more as a regular, you're hearing a voice, you're feeling something. But then, as the person kind of steps into it and gets more and more involved, all of a sudden he becomes very much aware that this is indeed a prophecy. So that would be an example where it wasn't necessarily earned, so to speak, meaning we're not dealing with a person that was trained as a prophet, but they are yet able to experience prophecy through Hashem, kind of not you following the regular channels, but kind of wanting to grab that person. It looks, Dr. Horowitz.
Rabbi, it seems like the majority of the prophets we have in Tanakh were kind of called up all of a sudden. There are a few that aren't, like let's say Elijah was hanging around prophets all the time, but like Jeremiah, Yechezkel, Moshe Rabbeinu.
Yirmiyahu, Yechezkel, Yoshayahu, meaning the fact that the receiving of their prophecy was unexpected. That's not what we're discussing right now. What we're discussing is, were they trained prophets before they started to receive prophecy? Is it clear?
Moshe Rabbeinu wasn't.
Sorry?
Moshe Rabbeinu wasn't.
Yes, okay, that's for sure. That's true, and that the Ramchal is going to make that point as we. That's the next example he gives. But I think the other prophets, Yirmiyahu, Yeshayahu, Yechezkel, I believe that they were trained as prophets. The when and where and how and what the prophecy was, and when it came to them, was not expected. But their ability to receive the prophecy, that was something that was developed. Okay, let's continue. So one example of an exception to the rule is Shmuel Hanafi, that he was called upon before he became a prophet, and then that developed into a prophecy. Also the image of the burning bush of Moshe Rabbeinu. Originally, that revelation was just kind of somewhat mundane. It was just like any other feeling. He saw a bush burning with fire. And Hashem called him with the voice of his father. But then, after Moshe Rabbeinu stepped in and he pursued the sneh and he got closer, then HaKadosh Baruch Hu started pouring the shefa on him. And then he had a true and full prophecy. So that would be a second example of an exception to the rule, where we have someone that was not yet trained as a prophet, and they experience prophecy in kind of a gradual process where Hashem draws them in, and then it becomes a full-fledged prophecy after that. Okay, let's continue with Daled. Those who do train themselves in prophecy, they do so through specific disciplines, known like specific knowledge. They train themselves in certain things that will draw Hashem's divine shefa upon themselves, and it will nullify. It'll nullify whatever blockings the physical body will create. So the physical body has certain drives, has certain natures to it that stand in the way of connecting to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and receiving that divine shefa. A big part of the training of a prophet is to train himself to learn how to override that, how to remove himself from that, to allow the prophecy to take place and to prevent the physical body from standing in the way of having a nevuah, a divine experience. And to draw out that revelation of Hashem's light and clinging to Him. The general idea is the intentions. There are certain intentions that the prophets would focus on. The uttering of certain holy names, the hilulim b'sehilos, and certain praises. Yitzorfu bam shemos b'darchei hatzerufim, with combinations of names with the different forms, amarnu le'il, as we have mentioned previously. So this sounds very close to what we would call meditation, to kind of be able to focus one's mind on certain kavanot, certain intentions, and certain names of Hashem, certain different combinations of those names, and to be able to be so focused on that a person kind of shuts down and leaves behind those physical limitations, that physical experience, and is able to enter into a divine experience. V'ulam, okay. According to whatever they are able to merit with their deeds, mizdakchim, and to purify, and to go in this way, to that extent Hashem comes close. And the flow just begins to start flowing. And they start to um,
Really?
they start to grasp one thing after another, until they reach a level of prophecy. Okay, so it sounds like something that the prophet is able to bring on his own, that he's able to go into this meditation, into this trance, if you will, with focusing, putting a total and absolute focus on the spiritual, leaving the body behind, and kind of rising up to this divine experience where the Navi connects to a Kadosh Baruch Hu, and in doing so opens up the channel to allow that flow from the Kadosh Baruch Hu to come down to the Navi. The Navi HaMuvhak, the expert Navi, the expert prophet, Yudei Kfar Darchei HaNevuah Al Hanocha, and he already knows the ways of prophecy properly. Yalamid Kol Echad Lefi Hachanoso. He can teach others and train others according to their preparations and their I don't want to say ability, I want to say like their makeup, like their, if they have what it takes. What to train them to do what they need to do to reach the desired goal. And they also can train them that when these revelations begin, when these prophets begin to experience the revelations, so then this master prophet continues to guide them on the basis of what is revealed to them. He instructs them and informs them what is still lacking in their quest. So that's a fascinating thing. So it's not just, it sounds like there's levels of training. The first level of training is you got to train the master Navi. The master prophet will train the apprentice how to meditate and how to essentially have an outer body experience and to connect to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and to open up the channel. Then, once he's achieved that and the channel is open and he's starting to receive that flow from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Navi, the master Navi is not done. Then he can train the apprentice according to what he's receiving. Meaning, he'll tell him, I'm seeing this, I'm feeling this, I'm hearing this. And the master Navi will tell him, this is what you're missing. This is what you need to do next. This is where you need to train. You need more training, as in, in this or that. He needs a trainer and a guide until they achieve clarity in their prophecy, complete clarity in their prophecy. Even if they can get things started and they can start to have a revelation and a shefa, that alone will not be enough for them to reach the end immediately. They need a tremendous amount of guidance, training, to make it all the way to the end properly. Each one according to his level and his preparation. Okay, so this is really, really fascinating. This prophecy is not like what a lot of people think, that it's just, Hashem just kind of, boom, just grabs somebody and just drops it into their head. Not at all. your typical prophecy happens through a prophet training to become a prophet, training to be able to meditate on Hashem's names and to have that outer body experience. And then once he's able to achieve that, so then there's a whole nother level of training that it just continues and continues until they have perfected not only being able to open themselves up to start receiving the message from Hashem, but to be able to understand what to do with it and how to develop it and how to delve deeper and to draw it further.
So how did the women prophets attend these classes?
That's a good question.
Were they like more like Moshe Rabbeinu or Shmuel that just came to them?
That's a great question. It sounds like you're assuming that a woman prophet could not be trained by a male prophet.
Yes.
Why would you assume that? Sneos, I presume, or
I suppose they can train them outside or something.
right?
My guess is these kind of classes weren't open to the public. You had to have certain care before the Rebbe prophet took you in. You had to make sure you had certain mitos, milos, whatever, that you just couldn't take anybody off the street and turn into a prophet.
Yeah. I think I would definitely assume that that's correct. Yeah. I don't think there was like the Jeremiah's Academy for Prophecy, and then it's like tuition is X dollars and you sign up and then, and they have classes and that's that. Yes, I definitely think that it definitely sounds like this was a one-on-one and it was only unique individuals that were even qualified to receive training. So therefore what? Does that help you with understanding your question about how you could have a chulda or a devora, how you could have these women prophets? Or do you still think that it's more likely that they must have come upon it on their own?
I mean, what you were saying before, there was some kind of one-on-one Masorah. I mean, Rambam talks about that, one generation of prophet giving to the next one, and so forth. But somehow it came to the women. They generally weren't involved in transmitting the Masorah that way. I imagine there were other Masorahs they said that women had, but I'm just curious how it came to them, how they would know.
Right. Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I do wonder, there are certain prophets that we know about because of the Sifrei Tanakh, because, their prophecies compose the books of Tanakh that we have, namely Yirmiyahu, Yeshayahu, Yechezkel, etc. Avadja, Chavakuk, Amos, Malachi. So the question is, how many other prophets were there running around? That's what I wonder. And like you mentioned the idea of a Masorah. How much of the prophecy was Masoric, I don't know what the right word is for that, was related to like a Masorah from one prophet to the next, and how much of it was just simply, someone wanting to connect to Hashem, to understand things better, more in this very unique way. I don't know. It is. It is.
Nevi'im. It's a canon of Nevi'im. Nevi'im is Saru Halad Sheikh Nesar Gedolah, and the Rambam lists the Nevi'im generation by generation, how it went down.
Yeah. No, I understand, but I'm just saying, like, was that a small number?
It's not Nevuah. It's also the Torah Shabbat. It's also the Torah Shabbat Peh, that somehow the Nevuah was handed down along with the Torah Shabbat Peh or something.
Yes, no, I agree 100% that clearly the Nevi'im played a role, meaning they were a part of the chain of the Masorah. Of the Masorah of Torah Shabbat Peh. What I'm wondering is, how many Nevi'im were there that had the power of prophecy, but were not part of the Masorah? You know, like, there were many scholars that lived in the generation of the Tanoim and the Amoraim who are not necessarily part of the Masorah. You know, they're we don't find them in Mishnah or in Gemara. But like there were certainly many more scholars in the era of the Mishnayos and the Gemara than the handful of names that we have in Mishnayos and the Gemara. That at least is my assumption. So I'm just wondering a similar thing regarding the Nevi'im, if there are many more. And the reason why I bring this up is because I think that the women who are Nevi'im are a good example of that. If you think about Devorah and Huldah and whoever else there might be, these women had significant prophecies, but in terms of the Masorah of Torah Shabbat Peh, passing down Torah Shabbat Peh, that we don't necessarily find. So, I don't know. It's a fascinating point that you're raising.
And how would Devorah act as a shofet if she didn't know anything?
That's a good question. How she ask as shofet if she's what?
If she didn't have some Masorah.
That's a really interesting question. How could she function as a shofet?
She had to have had Torah Shabbat Peh in order to act as a shofet.
Right. It's funny because I never thought about it from that perspective. I've always looked at it as, Devorah obviously knew what a shofet needed to know, meaning she was a Talmud Chacham or whatever, Talmudas Chachamis, whatever, however you say it. She knew everything that a shofet needs to know. I'd never equated that with being part of the Masorah. Now, maybe that's my mistake, but are those two things one and the same? That's what I'm wondering. Someone who that's a fascinating point. Someone who is enough of a scholar, enough knowledgeable enough to be a shofet, does that automatically mean that they are part of the Masorah? I don't know. I'm not sure. What do you think? What do you think about that, Dr. Horowitz?
I don't know. Let's see what the Ramchal has to say.
Okay, I mean, I don't think he's focusing on Masorah, so. But let's get back to the Ramchal.
Yeah, you're pretty much near the end of this year. I think I took up a lot of your time.
That's okay. I think that was a very, very fascinating point. Okay, so let's finish the paragraph that we're in the middle of. Where were we? We're up to hey. Yeah, let's look at number 5. Hey. Even after achieving the level of prophecy, you could still discern one prophet from another according to their level. That's interesting. Both quantitatively and qualitatively. Perush. There's some prophets that they're having prophecy all the time, some few and far between. Also, in terms of the quality of the prophecy, there's some who achieve a tremendous amount of closeness to Hashem. The Yazga Haskalas Gedolos mode, they understand extremely big concepts. There are some whose connection is not as great. And the understanding that they come to is not as great. This is what all prophets have in common. They all achieve a connection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu that they recognize. And a revelation from Hashem to them, which is recognizable to them with clarity, which they do not have any questions about. It's only that the level of each of these things, the levels of the connection and the levels of revelation, the levels of understanding, that is where there's a very broad spectrum amongst the prophets. Fascinating. Okay, we'll hold it here for tonight. Yishakayach, everyone for joining. We'll continue with paragraph Vav, number 6, next week in Mirza Hashem, continuing with prophecy. Have a wonderful night.